this is John Platten. John and I have written probably, 30 games together now?
Yeah, a lot.
Who knows how many books? We're still on weird. I mean, I've only written one book.
Right.
We've done movies, we've produced movies, we've done a million things together over the years. And he knows everything there is to know about franchise. And Tom Greanias is one of the few people who ever just, who I know, who ever just like made up his own, created his own franchise and just really started with nothing. Started with a strange, Web 1.0 website and turned it into a huge book deal. So we're gonna talk more about that. But I just figured we'd kind of warm up and get our terms straight here. So why don't we go to the PowerPoint?
Sure.
And go through that. That's actually showing up somewhere.
Yeah, it's going to show up here on the.
Yeah, and you guys chip in. If anybody has any questions, just ask them. I mean, we got a small group. It's pretty intimate, and it's not like anybody. Your life's going to be any poorer for missing a slide in the in the PowerPoint. Just sort of treat us like interactive objects, and
exactly.
We'll try to behave. All right, let's do it.
All right.
Okay, so this is you have to start and you might have guessed this is sort of John and I have been outlining for a new book we're going to do. We did a book about game writing and all that a few years ago. That's still doing well for us on Amazon. So we decided, whenever we come up for air, we're going to do another book. And this is our book about franchises and transmedia. And so we decided, like everybody else, that we'd start out with a definition. It's really tedious, and we won't do it in the book, and I won't read the definition. There was a literacy test before you came in, and we figured you can read it yourselves. But
there is a cool buzzword in there, though.
Oh, okay. What's a cool buzzword?
Mediasphere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nice,
Mediasphere.
huh?
Yeah, we fired that one right out. That's going to change everybody's
take that.
Life. Yeah. I mean, the whole fun thing about that is that. Transmedia it started out, it's TVs and movies and games and maybe we'll put toys and records. And now it's just everything. I mean, it's your life. I mean, the entire world is one big palette to paint on now, and including the real world.
And I would add, too, that for the definition of transmedia, the key word under transmedia for me is when we say we create complementary stories that support the franchise mythology. And what I mean by that, and what I think we all mean by that here, is that transmedia is not making a T-shirt. That's merchandising, right? Transmedia.
If the T-shirt tells a story.
If the T-shirt has a QR code and I click on the QR code and that takes me to a website which leads me to a puzzle which gets me to then.
And then your T-shirt ceases to exist.
Right, exactly.
Shreds.
But a lot of people tend to blur the line between merchandising or sort of traditional hey, we made a soundtrack, that's transmedia. Well, no, not really. Unless that soundtrack is somehow supporting the larger property in some story or narrative-driven way. Then yes, it is. But so I think the key word there is complementary. It's not just parasitically merchandising on the property.
Right, but I would add to that. I mean, we could have a perfectly good panel that was about nothing other than how to turn a T-shirt into a transmedia.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
You know what I mean? Because it's like people have to expand their thinking. There's something to do with that. That what used to be just collateral now ought to become its own product. But anyway,
exactly.
So yeah, we're still on slide one.
Yeah, no, I'll punch away as fast as you want. And then these are just some of the rules about sort of how you don't make a franchise, what is not franchisable. And so, screenshot from a lot of folks' favorite films, and certainly one of the greatest films of all time, Citizen Kane. Great movie, amazing experience, not really a franchise.
Well, it's a problem, because basic. Oh, do you have a question? No, you don't have it. It's a franchise if all the characters die.
Yeah. Some characters can die.
Okay. They are making a sequel to 300. Okay. And, 300 is your classic example of I was the only, my friend Frank Miller did the graphic novel. And so there's Dille is the only Spartan who doesn't die.
You look a lot better on film.
But that's, that's several trips to the gym before I like that.
I think the point I'm trying to make is that you can have franchises that are not character dependent, right? You can have Star Wars, which can have games set in settings that are thousands of years before the films, and none of the characters overlap.
Yes.
Yes.
I know how you can do that because certainly in some of my novels, I actually do go back into history because I have this centuries-old organization called the Alignment that different heroes in different epochs of time battle as the Alignment tries to steer the course of human history. And so those characters don't overlap, even if their foe does. And that's kind of like what the Justice League guys fighting, and a Spectre-like organization can do just what you're saying. You can have various heroes battling it, and their course may not overlap. The most recent example being the latest Bourne movie.
Exactly. Yeah, like there's this other guy, but yeah, I mean it's an interesting question. Star Wars you can because you have such a robust meta story
That's the goal, right?
Yeah, and the characters have that is certainly one goal, but yeah, it's certainly a goal. The characters have to somehow be relevant to the later characters. I mean, I have no idea how Star Wars books where there's nobody's a ancestor of Obi-Wan in there or anything like he's some,
Knights of the Old Republic.
yeah but Knights it's a really interesting I've done my time with Knights of the Old Republic but I mean even with that what you still have organizations you're very familiar with. You're very familiar with the Jedi. You have certain rules. There's a sense of Obi-Wan is somewhere around the corner from there. I mean it's not. It sort of is and isn't. But yes, if you hit the Holy Grail and you have Star Wars, you're doing just great. At that you can do that kind of stuff. Now the question is, would Knights of the Old Republic have been a stronger game had they hit on some of the things that we're familiar with from the movies? We'll never know. Yeah, it's arguable. But in the Star Wars universe, one of the best uses of transmedia I've ever seen in a game was Force Unleashed, in that they told a whole part of the story that I didn't even know nobody had ever told. And that is how the rebellion began. I mean, I just kind of, went to the movies and, there's a rebellion. And what they figured out, 27 movies into it, they figured out, there's a story to be told. We're only going to tell it in a game. I mean, that's pure, true, perfect transmedia. That game actually means something in the larger context of Star Wars. Oh,
so
we're now on slide 3.
Hey, it's lots of pictures on this one.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So strong franchises, and some of the representations here actually, as you can see, are not necessarily all feature related. So specifically, one of the most vibrant expressions of Batman right now, or the Dark Knight, is the Arkham series in video games. So Arkham Asylum, Arkham City. But all of these basically share common elements, and these are the elements. As in the previous slide, you can potentially argue the details on these, but these tend to be the generalized rules. So hero, heroine, or heroes, a home base, a mode of transportation, loyal allies, distinctive villains, iconic gadgetry, weapons, items, powers, a unique world, and a value system. Basically, all of the essentials.
Yeah, this is what we were talking about in the beginning. That I mean that's the kind of slide that that looked really smart 2 years ago when we were thinking about it.
Well, that's why it says traditional at the top.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so right. The truth is, okay, so let's talk about non-traditional for 2 seconds.
Wait, I got a slide for that.
Oh, well, I wanted them to talk about it before we actually went to the slide.
There you go. Look at that.
Oh man, that's just too much reading. Okay, all right. All right. Yes, there are a whole pile.
There are a lot of outlets now beyond the traditional, and some of these are actually are well developed enough now that they're sort of falling into the traditional as well.
Yeah, I mean nowadays you have all these tools. The problem is now you have to figure out how people are going to expect your franchise to be 24/7 everywhere, in every medium, and how much of this stuff can you do before and still maintain the quality? Yeah, when you think of Star Wars, you think about something that's been in development for 25 years. How do you do that with your franchise now? If I had an answer for it, I'd be answering it. But
one of the things we're dealing with right now in a project we're working on too is the last one, which is user-generated content, which is becoming such a huge part of a lot of franchises. And obviously you really don't have any control over it. The fans are kind of going to do what they want to do. And so it's figuring out how you can exploit that, how you can turn it to your advantage, how you can take great ideas that are coming out of your fan base and sort of embrace them and turn them into your own. Certainly back to Star Wars, a big reason for Boba Fett's advancement through the Star Wars mythologies was because he was so embraced by the fans, that he was sort of elevated by the fans, and then that influenced how he ended up in the fiction. The other thing that I think is really fascinating, and again ties into something Flint and I are working on now, is geolocation-aware games and events. Really, up until now, if you had something that was transmedia and you were focused on it and you wanted to express it in some way, things that were actually out in the world and happening were live events like concerts or maybe some sort of special appearance by your actors, maybe some type of stage play or some type of live performance. But now with the mobile devices being all geo-aware, it's fundamentally changing again. And you can actually do things in the real world that are basically being expressed in your fiction, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's another thing. Why don't we keep
Yeah, sure. The big point for me on this one is when you're thinking about transmedia, it's not just about the creating, it's about the consuming. Because people are not interacting with content the way they used to.
Yeah, why don't we move on?
Yep.
Exactly. Your thoughts.
Yep.
Yes. I mean, this is just talking about how easy it is to make the stuff, because like the whole subject that's really interesting to talk about, and it's something Tom can really address, is nowadays you can go out and do it yourself. And when I got into when in the media business, there were 7 studios and there were 3 networks and there was a little bit of syndication and there were some independent filmmakers, and it was always a dentist, who was going to finance your film, or it was mysterious Arab money or something. And now you can just go out and do it. You can publish your own book, your own novel tomorrow. And really the only difference between you and a publisher is, and a major publisher is publicity. I mean, talk about how you got into that.
Well, what's really interesting is I actually started with a web series. And as Flint had mentioned, it was pretty rudimentary. It basically had a picture of Antarctica, a satellite overhead, and it said, breaking news. Type in your email for the latest breaking news of the secret U.S. dig in Antarctica. My wife, who was the foreign news editor at the LA Times at the time, thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. And
all it was a picture of some guy walking around in the snow.
Yeah, it was, you wouldn't believe how many people signed up. In fact, when I went to my first American Booksellers Association convention in New York, there was a guy from Arbitron who was working with book-related stuff, and he typed in the URL. He said, I said, well, how do you know who's watching me? He said, we've been following you for a while. And he said, yeah. And the Atlantis Mapping Project was just above what's now the Oxygen Network. And that's how many people, in terms of unique visitors, were tuning in all the time. And the emails became some of the most forwarded emails in America. That is, clickability measured these things, and you would find this email this or save this on CBS.com or People.com at the time. Well, they had national rankings, and these were right up there in the top 5, the emails that came out with my made-up news. Up ahead, literally right up there with, lose 40 pounds in 40 days or how to keep your boyfriend. And that's when I found out what's really popular in American culture today.
Oh, I remember right around when I first met Tom, you were having these ethical problems with people were actually believing this Atlantis conspiracy.
Yes.
That, the Pentagon was hiding, the mothership from Close Encounters underneath the, or whatever you were doing it. And Tom was having this ethical problem with, like, if people are believing this. I mean, there are guys on Coast to Coast, because you're not a regular person on Coast to Coast, but at the time.
Yeah, I would appear on these late night radio shows. They have 3 to 13 million listeners, and they all wanted to know what was really going on in Antarctica. And I tried to explain that,
you were really honest last time I heard you.
Yeah, this is entertainment. And then what happened is
he was mostly honest.
The more that
which makes them believe you even less.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I've had to deal with all these people who actually believe that Atlantis Media Corp is this In-Q-Tel-funded diversion to focus American and worldwide attention on the fake secret dig in Antarctica and Temple Mount in D.C. so that the real digs can go on, without any coverage. And I found that keeps happening, and the new game I'm trying to do and convince Flint to help with deals with that very thing in terms of people have trouble blurring reality and fiction. And the idea of geolocation, aware, and mobile devices and the like really puts the process of discovery in the hands of more people than ever. It's pretty cool. But again, you don't have to start with a big budget or anything. This was simply a little website and some emails. And personally, I think games like this, let's say when people approach me to do a TV series, I think a game like that is the TV series. I don't think you have to produce, a $4 million a week scripted television program for people to get the benefit and the enjoyment of hundreds and hundreds of hours of a world that they really connect with. And that's what, Flint and John are talking about, is that, what is the TV show? What is the movie franchise?
Well, yeah, I mean, and because there are two really interesting themes here. I think it's all heading down to, when you're dealing with kid franchises, I mean, the younger it gets, the more it's a big orange character, like that, it's that. But when you deal with adult stuff, people want it to be kind of real, and they'll accept, they like an edge of, maybe they want something that could wink at them a little bit and say this isn't really real. But anytime you can blur reality and fiction, because, I mean, look what's happening to what we are to perceive as reality. I mean, we have all sorts of, fictional characters who just happen to have DNA and be walking around. But, I mean, look at any reality show people. The Kardashians aren't, exactly real people. You know what? I mean, that's not really their life. We don't really believe all that stuff happens to them. And we know it's kind of rigged. I mean, I like Cake Boss, but I mean, part of me believes that throwing cakes at each other is kind of discussed before it actually happens in the room. I mean, it's all blurring fiction and reality. And I think what's going to happen more and more is people are going to have more and more fictional identities. You sort of have the real, whatever the real you is, and the fictional version of you. Because I mean, we're raising a whole bunch of kids that we're training one way or another in ways that only criminals and spies used to be trained. They live under aliases. They live behind all sorts of things to conceal their identities. And we teach them to do that. And they have numerous different names. And I don't know that Shadowy Steel plays the game a whole lot differently than my son does, but that's one of his alter egos. And he has all sorts of characters. I mean, we're teaching people to be fictional in a way that they've never been before.
Yeah, I think a subset of that too is that at the same time, everyone's learning a lot more about everybody else than they used to know. I mean, when things like, specifically with Facebook, it's like suddenly I know more details about a lot of people's lives than I really care to know. And in that process of people willing to share, I think comes with it this idea that, okay, now how do you entertain me in that space? How do we have something we can commune and do together? And because I like you as a friend, I want to go beyond just, saying, hey, will you come help me tend my crops? I want an entirely different experience out of that relationship that's now developed.
Farmville's a deep relationship?
No.
It's like pretty meaningful, I think.
I'll pop the slide here to the side next.
Yeah, we'll go next. On that note, no, but I mean, think about it. People are certainly willing to relate. I've thought about it on Facebook.
Is that a real connection? I mean, you raise an interesting point because Zynga's been having some troubles lately. Do people connect at a deep enough level to really make Farmville a franchise? Or is it a hit that just happened to, go a little longer than most?
I don't know. I mean, because I so didn't get it that, I can't speak to Farmville. I really.
Yeah, I think that for me, Farmville has probably got elements of a franchise, but really didn't break out as a franchise. Whereas something that you wouldn't think would be a franchise, like Angry Birds, became a monster franchise. Mm-hmm. So I think it depends. But that's the nature of it. I think much like everything else, it's like, hey, this is going to be a hit. No, it's not. The fans and the audience and the players and the watchers all sort of decide that.
Well, I think you can make an argument that a new medium demands a hit, whether or not the real product's a hit. In other words, the first time I ever saw that, and this is, I believe about 70% of what I'm going to say, and that is...
so like normal, basically.
Because I could argue it the other way. But I remember when CD-ROMs came out, and everybody was getting a CD-ROM, and it was the Christmas where you had to have a CD-ROM, and Myst went through the roof. Mm-hmm. Okay, and there was one hit. It was Myst, and maybe the second one did okay. And then Riven came out, and everybody got confused. But but there was this one hit, and everybody made Myst-like games, and it didn't go anywhere. And it was like, well, is this a real hit, or is this just, it was kind of good enough and there had to be a hit because everybody was talking about CD-ROMs? And I could argue that about 6 ways. I have not seen a huge afterlife for Myst after that. Now, that may be because of legal problems, or, there are all sorts of, there are a million ways to mess up your franchise, which is another whole panel we could do someday. Something like Angry Birds, really cool physics dynamic. It's a huge game franchise. I need to see it before I believe it's a transmedia franchise. Because my rule with the transmedia franchise is all the different mediums have to sustain themselves. Mm-hmm. That's the difference between advertising collateral for a product and it actually being a transmedia franchise. It's like when, I started turning toys into TV shows, right? And the fact that the TV shows stood on their own, it made them, in my mind, transmedia. Had the TV shows gone face down, because you can turn anything into a TV show. I was at a studio that made Pac-Man into a TV show. That doesn't mean it's really a TV show. It was on the air and everything, but it wasn't. It was still, a license slap on something. But when it actually can sustain itself in another medium, that is something that's real transmedia. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Where is transmedia unique? Is the interplay between the different media.
And every single transmedia speaker you'll ever hear will give you a different. That's why I had the fake definition up here, at the beginning. We'll have a different definition for transmedia, but I'd say the places to start to look is advertising collateral is not transmedia. It's advertising collateral. I think now it. First of all, it has to simultaneously exist in different mediums, and all of them have to sustain themselves. I think that's one place I would begin to look for what transmedia is. 2, I would look at a healthy, nowadays in 2012, this wasn't true in 2010, but I would look for a very healthy fan content creation system would be something I'd really want to see.
But I think the other thing.
But
what you mentioned too is I think the connective tissue is, to me, the important part. It's how they sort of all fit together and connect to each other that really matters. When we did the Chronicles of Riddick video game, it was fascinating because we couldn't get access to the script the studio would not give us access to actually read the script.
Yeah, like 2 years later, Vin told us
Yeah.
they didn't have one.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why.
And
That's
so-
why we couldn't have it.
and
We were getting all this secret studio
So, but
stuff.
they were willing to let us, peek at certain sequences, and there was a reference to this slam, Butcher Bay. And so it's a throwaway line in the script that we just said, oh, well, let's do the story of Butcher Bay. And so, literally 2 seconds of screen time in the final film became a 40-hour gameplay experience. That was the connective tissue back to the main property. So for me, those, I think, are the elements that really have to be there.
Do you think
Yeah.
if you have access to the script, you would have done something?
No, we'd done something awful.
We would have done something
We were
different.
infinitely
Absolutely.
better off.
Because isn't it kind of nice that it was something a
It,
little
Exactly.
it was great. I mean, here was our pitch, okay? And this is where stuff can come, because what was deceptively strong about Pitch Black and Riddick was they actually had created a world. I mean, you had a world where this guy, that could, have unique vision, could really be an important guy for Pitch Black. Okay, so you put him in a big dark prison, that really works. You put him in a bright sunny place called Crematoria. I don't know what our hero's doing, but actually it turned dark. But you knew what kind of people populated it. You could look at the guy, and all of his opponents would be some different version of him or reaction to him. And what real good transmedia stuff is, it allows you to go in. It's a little bit what you were talking about with Star Wars, but in a different way. Is it allows you to go in and populate this world and know what the world is, and it brings something to the franchise that wasn't there before it. And that's what we're kind of proud of with that project. Is
Well, actually, it was interesting. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Some of the elements that we did in the game ended up then getting incorporated into the film.
Yeah, and what was funny about that, and there's very little adult supervision until Vin came along and liked it. But the entire pitch we got was a guy named Pete Wannett. It's one of the best game producers there ever was. Pete Wannett, basically says, "Okay, guys, here's what we want. I got the story all worked out. Okay, I've told this before, but first scene, Riddick gets captured and he gets put in Butcher Bay. Okay, the last scene, he escapes. You got to just figure out the middle. Figure out the middle stuff.
That's it.
Okay, and that was our pitch. But we had a world, and we had something that was good enough for a story. It's what's any prison story? The guy's in prison, he either gets in or he gets out, and how he does it. That's your story. But we had a guy
Easy peasy.
that was able to just be so naked in his description of it. It's like, oh yeah, sure, we'll figure out the middle part. We have most of the night doing that. But that was something that I think taught us a lot about transmedia. Is you find some little hook that you grab onto, and you just take that and run with it, and everybody's happy with it. Superman. I mean, Lobo started out as a villain. He ends up being his own character. Catwoman's had a pretty interesting life. Okay, what do we got here?
This here was just, and these are, very broad generalizations of various ways that the property, your franchise, would be expressed in various transmedia platforms. And, the toys one is something that you've talked about before.
Yeah.
Comics, film, games, books, and television. There are certainly, those are the biggies, but, obviously, as we've shown before, it can... There's a lot of flex in here.
I'm remembering now what Thomas told me about, and then you start showing a PowerPoint, you really throw an anchor into your conversation.
Exactly.
So
we can anchor at any time.
I remembered that too late. We were really trying to... but a lot of this gets to, because it's what you guys are trying to do. I think one thing that's different about the sort of superimposed transmedia that we have now from the way franchises used to organically grow is, in the old days, it would just start out whatever it was. It would start out as a TV show, and then later on somebody would figure out how to do something else with it. And now, from the beginning, you approach it like, okay, will this support all this different stuff? Will it support toys? Will it support games? So on, because part of the, I think, modern necessity is you got to have a lot of revenue streams, to guarantee an investment, and you probably want to, because each one of those revenue streams brings something to you. if you have, let's take Angry Birds just because we don't have one. It's a good example for right now, and we don't have a movie, or it's not fully exploited. If you're approaching that in a current transmedia way, you would have figured out that your lead bird is Tweety. Well, that name's already taken for birds, but is Whistler, and so on. It probably would have wrecked the game. But it obviously wasn't conceived that way. It's a gravity game, and so yeah.
But isn't that? I mean, maybe that's kind of the defining characteristic of transmedia versus these more traditional cross-marketing activities that have been done, which is that there is a conscious effort at the inception of the property to think about what it is going to be in these different media and make sure that it lends itself to those other media.
Absolutely.
Sort of
Yes.
The after the fact,
Yeah, let's
let's
slam something together. And also, too, I think the big mind shift you have to make is you have to think of everything as marketing. Okay, when Tom's got a book sitting on the shelf and somebody sees the cover of the book, not only is that the book, but that's also marketing for him and for his other book. You see what I mean? And if he has a book that's kind of got a puzzle element on the cover, well, that's an activity that can lead to a whole other subset of, Atlanta's, puzzle products.
But there's a distinction between whether or not that particular extension of the property is intended to be a profit center versus a marketing.
Yes.
But what
Marketing is a profit center.
exactly? What if you said everything was everything? Now, all of your marketing has to be self-funding.
But is the success of your marketing campaign evaluated based upon the return it generates or based upon some other metric, right? Like that's the question.
Well, let's say there's no marketing campaign.
What if it's content and marketing at the same time?
It's all the
Exactly.
same stuff.
Marketing at merged, marketing is now profit.
Right, and yeah, I mean the breakthrough, and I'm not all the way here to figuring. You're exactly right. I mean, you're thinking in the normal sense, but the breakthrough almost is if you don't release anything that's just marketing. If it's just it is leading to some kind of a sale. I mean, if you have the cover of a magazine, you're selling a magazine, right? You're selling the magazine. Well, what if that's your product? You know what I mean? In other words, like if every piece of marketing somehow was also content, it would be an unbelievably efficient
That
mechanism.
would be an enormous paradigm shift from where we are today, don't you think?
Yeah, but don't you think that's where we're going?
It's happening already.
It's
absolutely
I
absolutely
think
happening.
in weird symbiotic ways it's already happened. You look at James Bond, you look at early James Bond, and it was so apparent to everybody at the time that nobody ever noticed it or commented on it. But James Bond, I would argue anyway, that James Bond and Playboy were the same brand. Playboy magazine was the adult skew of James Bond. You had the James Bond girls in the magazine. You had the sophisticated literature. It's almost an in-world object of that's what he would go read on, when he's not out shooting anybody.
And I couldn't wait until I turned 18 so I could have my first vodka martini.
Yeah, exactly. Shaken, not stirred.
Right.
Now, okay, so right there, that should have been your 007 vodka or some kind of squint and look at it, vodka ad. Then you have, and then you skew down. You have your toys. You have your slot car kit. I remember I had my James Bond slot car set. Now the Playboy audience was probably not playing with the slot car set, and I wasn't supposed to be playing with Playboy. But what you've done is you had different ages of the product. I mean, I never actually saw any of those magazines people told me about. But but I mean, if you think about it. That was almost the same brand. And then, I would argue the Sharper Image, when they were really kind of cool in the beginning, was an extension of the James Bond brand. That was where I bought all the cool gadgets, I mean, they could have called it Q's shop, and it would have been even cooler for them. And I would argue that Banana Republic, if you remember when they started, not what they are now, that was Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was just branding nobody did. It was Indiana Jones's, the store he went to buy things.
Well, I think you can see. I think you can see.
Does that
like,
make any sense?
But you can go on YouTube right now, and you can find a lot of brands and franchises that are basically marketing blue jeans and radios and cars that have YouTube channels where they do the soft sell. They're out there making films. They're making entertainment, and it just so happens that the entertainment features the new BMW. They're out there doing it now.
Well,
It's happening.
All right, there's no guy in America, I mean, be honest about this. Anybody put on a tuxedo and not for a moment just like, you know, I mean, the illusion goes away on first contact with the mirror. But there's this minute where when you're putting on the tuxedo, you know, that sort of sub-branded James Bond. He owns the tuxedo. The same way Indiana Jones owned the leather jacket.
Two questions. Okay, how is Red Bull doing this week?
Very well.
And when are you guys going to do the Felix Baumgartner game?
Well, I mean, that's the weird thing. So, if you can look at all this stuff as to how do you symbiotically do this stuff. I mean, in other words, the product placement, I think, was the key to the future. You know, it looks cheesy and tacky, but not if it's well done. I never thought an Aston Martin was cheesy and tacky just because they happen to be sitting in Bond movies. They just remain to this day outside my car purchase price range. I mean that's the $500,000 Aston Martin's just rough on my Visa card, but it is still a product that when I see it is inextricably tied to that brand. And you just wonder, if you think of all this stuff blurring and you view all these people saying that we have a symbiotic relationship, and the really cheesy word for it would be to call it lifestyle, but it's more than that. I mean, I saw that, the Camaro driving around, and I was thinking, hey, there's Bumblebee. I had no interest in driving Bumblebee, but nevertheless, I did immediately associate it with the brand. Yeah.
Yep.
How do you think the understanding in the industry of the concept of transmedia has evolved from studios saying that, well, this is a transmedia franchise, it's a movie and a website?
Well,
it's come quite a bit. It's moved quite a long way since. It used to be that film led everything. It was just all about the movie, and then everything else was a subset of the movie. So it was just and a lot of when Flint and I started doing video games, you were a subset of the marketing department, because the marketing department was basically doing licensing, and the licensing was, hey, we're going to make a video game, and that's where you all fit in. And now I think it's entirely different. People approach these in an entirely different way.
Now, one thing that is still the same, and that is when you look at a lot of the big studio slate deals where multiple pictures are being financed, and you do get sponsors who are trying to promote across all movies, get their products in. And when it comes to games, the studios still they do not like it when games are carved out in terms of the rights. They do like to have it, and one of the things the studios still have is massive P&A spend for a movie. So when they're throwing $60 million just in advertising for a movie, they want to get the most bang for the buck out of it, and they want a game coming out to help with that, but to also promote the game. They really want to own it all, and when it comes to merchandising. And so even though projects are still considered, they'll say, oh, we just bought a multi-platform property. And they will license it out to others to do. They still want to control it. So it's a little interesting. I don't know how organic it may really be, because a lot of times they have an intention for a project and they don't exploit it, and they don't know how. And
and a lot of times you get the feeling they have no intention of exploiting it. They just don't want you to.
Yes.
Well,
they don't want. They don't want. I mean, what you want to do is you want to make. My lawyer explained a concept to me where we were getting kind of a bad back end part of a deal on this project we did, and he said, I can go back for schmuck money. I said, what's schmuck money? He said, well, that's like some payment they have to give you if the thing goes really huge and they realize you've been completely hoisted on the deal. So schmuck money. Well, we have the biggest thing to make transmedia work. We started out talking about Star Wars. One of the things about Star Wars that nobody ever comments on is one of the reasons we're talking about it now, 28 years later?
More than that.
38 years later. Long time after.
Long time after.
Okay. I wasn't born yet, so I don't remember. But, the reason we're talking about all these years later is the control of that remained in one guy's hands. And you can get mad at George Lucas because you didn't like the movies and all that, but what you can't say about the movies is that he didn't care. He may have made bad decisions, But imagine what that property would have been in the hands of some corporation that's going in and out of business, being hostily taken over, being bought and sold. You would have had some pretty shabby periods of Star Wars, yeah.
I agree 100%. And I think that the licensing business model is at the heart, is probably the single biggest enemy of successful transmedia property.
Well,
But
you just have to change the model and make it an inclusive model, which is, it's kind of, another thing that's changed is that when this all started, there was a clear hierarchy of mediums. Movies were the big time, TV was second, books were kind of classier but didn't make as much money except for the author. I mean, Stephen King was probably still wealthier than anybody, but for the author, and games were here somewhere, and people kind of knew games made a lot of money. But there came a point, if you're Blizzard, do you really want to make a World of Warcraft movie and put, a couple $1 billion a year of revenue online for a bad Saturday, bad Friday night? Do you want to put that at risk? No. Yeah.
Well, I was going to follow up on the gentleman back there. The other thing, and this is something that Flint and I experienced a couple of years ago, and I won't name the film, but we did a game for a fairly large feature film that involved comic characters. And we had written an outline for the game, and then we got invited to the studio to meet with the team that was actually making the film, and sat in a room with the director, the producer, and at first, unbeknownst to us, the screenwriter of the film. And I don't want to say what it is because I don't want to get in trouble.
I'm not saying to say what it is,
okay.
But what you expect that meeting to be, 2 years ago, what the meeting would have been was some guy in licensing saying, Mervyn Schnogg's suit, it really has to be an azure color. It can't go all the way to, to dark blue. There was it would just be this very cut and dried things where people were dictating to you what your licensing agreement you'd made was. With no regard whatsoever for what you were doing. It was totally defensive that you didn't mess up their thing.
Exactly. So we have the VP of the studio, the major studio. We have the director, executive producer, screenwriter, composer, I think was there, a visual effects guy. And basically the whole production team is there, showing us all this stuff. And then after they show us everything, they go, so can you give us any ideas on some cool set pieces?
Well, it was worse than that.
And like, what set pieces are you doing in the game, and how do we incorporate those?
We were there to pitch our game, and we're wondering why every one of these guys has to approve our game. and 3 sentences in, it's like, look, we trust you on the game. Just do what you want to with the game. We need ideas for our movie. And then all of a sudden, we're kind of sitting at this table, and we're realizing they're taking games a whole different level of seriously than anybody had ever. They were also probably really desperate. Well,
exactly. They were talking to us. So
showed that we didn't help much. But
it came out.
Do you really think that's typical?
Actually, some of our ideas were. That was a very unusual experience for us.
Yes.
But we have another game we did where we had 2 scenes from our games show up in the next movie.
That's correct.
And we had another one where the opening scene from our game was stolen from our game and became the opening scene of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we had another game that came out in which the entire level that we cut became the game.
Yeah,
so
cut because
cut because of budget, and then they did a sequel, and they basically just took everything that we wrote and made that the sequel.
Yeah. One of the big things that's happened with the studios is that yes, they want to control everything and drive things, but they're culturally downstream now, so the discovery process in terms of the proven properties they want to adapt or make are coming more and more from games, comics, books, and the like. So that's what's really happened. I mean, movies are really capital intensive, super risky to make, and if they're going to throw that kind of money, they would like to believe they have some proven, property, or if they've got a movie with a new director, because they're skewing young for unproven directors, they'll turn to veterans in the game industry and see, well, what can you tell us here?
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
As writers and creators of the video game, are you compensated at all if they're just taking your scenes word for word?
Oh, the Springs truck showed up. I had a big one in my house. John had a small Springs truck. But no, we didn't. We were real flattered, and the Writers Guild was not happy.
You can't. Screenwriters, you can't
No.
whole ideas and whole scenes and not compensate them?
You would think so.
You would think so.
So,
Yeah, I mean, but, here's the deal. We were just kind of flattered. I mean, at some level or another, we're artists. I mean, we're pretty sleazy, but at another level, there is something really exciting about seeing this thing you wrote and you expected at the time, some CG character to, you're expecting that, and all of a sudden you're seeing the real thing in the big screen theater, and it's just kind of cool. It was sort of, for us, it was a proof of concept. And we ended up, in that particular case, we ended up writing 2 movies for them.
Well, but I'm saying there's a practical consideration for us too, which is those folks that did that called us back.
of course,
So we look at those as relationship builders as well. So there's an investment. That's an investment.
Our own transfer.
There's always good
I don't consider it being screwed. That is our own transmedia proof of concept.
That's the cost of
That
doing business
If we are writing
sometimes.
a scene for a game,
right.
because remember, it's their perception that that their medium's the king medium, and about the time they're mining us, we're winning a larger strategic battle that we ourselves might not live to fight. But also, what's the real conversation? I'm calling the union. I mean, that's real, not 21st century.
No, the real conversation is the deals need to evolve. The structure of the deals need to evolve.
Yes.
Or we know the next project that you have, and we will expect to be getting the phone call to be assigned to it any day now. Correct?
Yes, for the indignity or
Yes.
the apparent ripoffery or whatever you want to call it of that, we profited greatly.
Exactly.
You just have to play a long game. I mean that.
Yeah. Sorry.
But where do you go to pitch a true transmedia concept then? I mean, do you recommend that you have to pick a lead platform?
No, that's sort of what's the first point in that slide right there. It's just, I mean, if you look at what's happening right now, people are making entire properties off of Twitter feeds. I mean, it's happening.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be in a specific platform.
The real answer now is you can just go out and do it. You don't have to, if you want to write, if you're writing novels, I mean, here's living, breathing proof of the fact that a guy goes out and writes a novel and makes a website, and all of a sudden he's got, getting chop blocked by publishing companies to make deals because he's gotten out ahead of them. You can go write your own book and self-publish it. You can go shoot your own video stuff if it's cool enough. You've laid pipe for your franchise. I mean, pretty much, well, okay. John and I had a movie made that was based on a game design document, and twice have sold things to studios that have been based on game design documents. I just sold a thing that was based on a 25-year-old graphic novel and novels that I wrote when Ronald Reagan was president. But they just kind of, their time came around, and they could have just as easily been right now a self-published novel. You just take your skill set and go out and do stuff, and the market will find you. That's a weird answer, but I mean, the whole idea of, you go get your knee pads, go beg to somebody to take away all your rights and all that, because the double edge of it is, if you've gone out and done it, and you're showing somebody a novel or a graphic novel or a really cool Twitter story, you've already got a property. And that's a very different negotiation than, here's a screenplay, and it's of no value whatsoever unless you buy it. And that's not a strong bargaining position.
And the other thing too is, from a platform standpoint, our friends at Machinima, they're doing 1 billion with a B unique views a month now on their YouTube channel. What network is doing anything like that? But it's a YouTube channel. You guys, some of you may be familiar with it, but it's basically a broadcast network set up within YouTube that focuses specifically on sort of gamer culture. They're sort of right in the 13 to 35-year-old male demographic, and it's comic books. If you go to Comic-Con, it's that crowd.
It's hardline,
and it's geek culture, films, video games, music, rock and roll, that sort of thing. But the thing is they're right, exactly. But they're doing 1 billion views a month on 5-minute videos.
Wasn't there a TV network like that? Was it G4 or something?
Yeah, G4 is about to cease to exist.
Now I'm curious, is it just because it was on the internet that it's more successful?
Exactly.
Okay.
I think what put G4 out of business is Machinima, and the reality
well,
of
not just that. Did anybody here watch G4?
Exactly.
I mean, I mainline games and all day long.
But it gets to the audience. The audience for that, I have a 15-year-old son. The audience for that group of entertainment, for that kind of entertainment, is looking for a 5-minute experience. They're not looking for a half-an-hour experience. They're looking for something entirely different. They're looking for something they can grab on the run on their mobile device. That's what they're looking for, and that's what G4 did not.
It's also true transmedia from the point of view that what Machinima started out was they were movies that sometimes fans, sometimes professionals, would make based on World of Warcraft. Okay.
And Halo. And
so what
Red
it was
Blue.
was all of a sudden, oh, I can't play World of Warcraft because I can only play that on my PC, but here's my phone and I can watch, these funny movies from it. And that is all of a sudden, look at everything that happened right there. Okay, Blizzard, wittingly or unwittingly, gave people I think pretty wittingly, gave people all the tools to go out and make movies. And at a resolution people really couldn't. All they had to do is put a script and learn to edit and all that. Fans go out and make that content, entertain each other. And now, not only is that self-generating content, I mean, think of the implications of all these things that are happening, but is self-generating content probably being played on a platform you don't support at an hour when they cannot play your game and yet your franchise is still right there. And almost any of those movies gives you a deeper insight into the world of the franchise. I mean, maybe there's a more winning way to do transmedia, but I don't know what it would be.
And another thing about that technology, and gets back to when you were talking about the Red Bull space jump stunt.
Yeah, just eject us when you ask.
8 million people streaming high def simultaneously in real time watch that event around the globe. If I'm a network executive, I'm having a very bad Monday after that event, because you're seeing the future happening right in front of you. I mean, where's broadcast going to be 5 years from now when that's happening today?
Well, but yeah.
Even though it was postponed several times,
Exactly.
off in a lot of the comments I was reading on YouTube, people still came back on Sunday.
Exactly.
Well, because you get to the absolute one of the best uses of transmedia or gamification is you look at fantasy football. Okay, all of a sudden you have the NFL. Okay, this same old brand that's been sitting around since the teens or 20s or however long it's been, and somebody figures out, hey, right now most people only care about their team. Okay, I care about the Los Angeles Ashtrays, and I don't care about any of the other teams, except maybe there's another game that affects the Los Angeles Ashtrays. But that's all I care about. Fantasy football, all of a sudden you draft your own team, and you have stakes in all 28 games that are being played. You are mainlining that thing, and you're doing it during the week, and you're endlessly looking at stats, and you're endlessly following the stories. I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, how do they already had the Super Bowl, but what they did is they just exponentially increased fan participation.
Well, they didn't really do it, right? I mean, it was a fan-grown activity.
They were exactly, but they were smart enough to embrace it.
To exploit it.
Okay, in other words, the old reaction, you're exactly right. The old reaction would have been, even George Lucas's early reaction with Star Wars is, oh, somebody's using our stuff, sue them. Okay? The NFL, if they had decided, oh, somebody's using Peyton Manning, sue them, would have made exactly the wrong decision. And at some level or another, they figured out, what? That now means we can sell a whole new TV service? I mean, anybody ever watched Red Zone? I mean, that is, I have ADD. That's too much for me. You got 5 games going simultaneously, and they're only inside the 20. And then you got the scores popping up of every other game going on, and then you have your smack talk from the other guys on fantasy football telling how your guys are complete weasers. Oh, sorry, we're getting the hook here. We usually get ejected faster than this. You guys have been a great audience here. Thanks a lot.
It's been a master class in franchising, right?